Hello, welcome to episode number 80 of the Leading Yourself podcast. Today, not only is episode 80, but it also coincides with the second anniversary of the podcast. And I can't be more excited. I can't be more thankful for you listening to the podcast. And to be honest, I can't be also any more proud of myself for staying consistent in this journey for the last 2 years. And talking about the journey, today I'm going to be sharing the one single most important learning that I had over the last 2 years while being the host of the Leading Yourself podcast. And that is that it's all about the journey. I'm a goal getter. I believe in setting goals and having a vision. And I'm all about hustling to cross that finish line. But I've learned that it's not about crossing the finish line. It's all about the journey. I'm going to share with you why I shift my perspective, how I shift my perspective, and how I fall in love with the process. I'll be sharing a few tips that hopefully can help you as well fall in love with your own journey. So let's dig into today's podcast episode. Welcome to the Leading Yourself podcast. This is your host, Carolina de Arriba. I'm an HR professional, health and fitness coach, wife, mom, and above all things, a goal getter. In this podcast, we're going to be digging into all things leadership, professional and career development, habits, and relationships. This is a podcast for those who want to become the best version of themselves. Those who have big dreams and are willing to embrace the journey and put in the work to achieve them. My goal is to share with you the tools, tips, and tricks to help you in your journey. So let's dig into today's episode. Okay, today we are celebrating the second anniversary of the Leading Yourself podcast. It has been 2 years, you guys, since I started this podcast, and it has been a ride, an amazing journey so far. Sometimes it's hard to believe that it has been already 2 years and 80 episodes. When I started the Leading Yourself podcast, I was so scared of overcommitting, and I started pushing out episodes every other week. And it was before the 1 year anniversary that I decided to go all in with this project and challenge myself to put out a new episode every week. And one of the reasons why I decided to do that is because I'm having so much fun. You know, coming here to my basement and recording these podcast episodes, it energizes me. It fulfills me in ways that it's hard to explain. And I really, really enjoy doing this. And that was one of the reasons why I increased the frequency of the podcast. But it wasn't always like that. So one of the biggest lessons learned in the last 2 years, I would say, with the podcast, and in the last 3 years with my health and fitness journey, has been that it's never about the goal. It's always about the journey. You might have heard this expression before, that it's all about the journey. Happiness is about the journey. It's not about the destination. A lot of times, especially type A personalities like me, that I'm very goal oriented, I always have a goal in mind, and I'm driven by achieving that goal. And I can visualize that finish line, and I can visualize myself crossing that finish line. And that really motivates me. And when I started the podcast, being completely honest with you, I did had a goal in mind. And that goal had to do with the number of people that I would reach out to, how many downloads of the podcast I wanted to achieve. And behind that goal, there was a why, which I always, when you hear me talk about goal setting, you probably have heard me talk about the why behind the goal. And without that why, your goal is powerless. So, the why behind my goal with reaching 1 million downloads of the Leading Yourself podcast was that I wanted to reach out to more people. I wanted to make an impact in others and hopefully help you in your journey of personal growth, career, and leadership development. That was my vision. That was my goal when I started the Leading Yourself podcast, and that has not changed. Now, I'm far away from crossing that finish line. The Leading Yourself podcast this week is reaching 20,000 downloads. That's only what, if I'm doing my math correctly, at 2% out of my goal. And I don't know, I did not had a time frame in my mind because when I started the podcast, I started it thinking that this is a long-term thing, right? I didn't want to start the podcast, do it for a few episodes and stop, or do it for a year or two and then move on to the next thing. But when I started the podcast, I saw it as something that I keep myself seeing doing over time. But I was also afraid of running out of ideas of what to talk about, running out of topics. So that is one of the reasons why I think falling in love with the journey and really making it about the journey and not the destination was such an aha moment for me over the last 2 years. Because if I think about the goal, right, and I think there's two types of people in this world. They are the people who believe that there is no reason to celebrate unless you've crossed that finish line. Like the celebration is reserved for when you cross the finish line, when you achieve that big goal. And then there's the people who like to celebrate every milestone, every step that they make towards that goal. And when I started the podcast 2 years ago, I was probably the first type of person. Like I always have held very high standards for myself, and I was never satisfied until I achieved my goals. And I thought that I should celebrate once I achieve that goal, because otherwise that celebration effect kind of dilutes. That was the perspective that I had. And that perspective has changed drastically in the last 2 years. I would say even in the last 3 years between my podcast and my health and fitness journey, where now I know that it is about the journey and it's not about the destination. What I'm trying to do here, yes, I still have goals, and yes, those are important to me and they play an important role, right? They set direction, they keep me on track, they help me track my progress, and it's something that I strive towards, right? And being a type A personality, that is important to me. But with the podcast and with my health and fitness journey, I learned to appreciate the process and falling in love with the process. See, when I decided to start the podcast, I asked myself a series of questions at the time because I didn't want to fail at podcasting. I knew that I wasn't great at podcasting. In fact, one of the reasons why I started the podcast is because I believe that you become better by practicing. So I wanted to become better at public speaking, and I wanted to become more confident and more comfortable speaking and teaching. And I saw this as an opportunity for me to grow. And let me tell you that I was listening to some of the very first episodes of the podcast the other day, and I felt a little bit embarrassed of myself. Like, I was terrible when I started. And I know I'm very critical of myself, and a lot of people tell me it was just fine. But when I think about how long it took me to actually record that first episode, like how many times I recorded over and over and over, and it was like little pieces that I glue all together because I couldn't like talk for the entire duration of the podcast episode, which now I'm able to without having to even prepare in advance. I can just improvise, come here and start talking. I just need a topic. And then I start talking about it. At the beginning, it was nothing like that. Like, I had to write it down, and I had to have it in front of me. So I make sure that I touch on all the points. And it took a lot of different attempts before I felt comfortable even publishing a podcast episode. And even when I listen to those podcast episodes, I can see like a day and night difference in how I speak and everything. So definitely is helping me grow for sure. But back to the topic of falling in love with the journey. When I started the podcast, I asked myself a series of questions because I didn't want to fail. One of the things that I'm afraid of is failing, right? Like many people, maybe you can relate. I don't know. But for me personally, the sense of failure is something that I'm afraid of. And I didn't want to start a podcast and then stop a few weeks later or a few episodes later. So I asked myself questions like, why do I want to do a podcast? What is my why? And I asked that question several times to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to see if the podcast was really what was going to satisfy that why. And then I also asked myself, what would it take, right? What would it take to be a podcast host? What are the things that I need to do on a regular basis? What are those routines, those habits, those actions that I need to be consistent at? Meaning, what is the journey, right, to become a podcaster? And am I willing to do those things? Are those things gonna energize me or are gonna deplete me from my energy? Because see, I don't do this podcast to make an income. Actually, I haven't made any money with this podcast. I do it because I want to create an impact. That is my why behind. So if I was not going to get paid, if this is not my job, if this is something that I'm doing for personal fulfillment, for personal growth, for me being able to make an impact and leave a legacy behind, I wanted to make sure that I was willing to do the things that were required of me to do this, and that I was willing to commit to those things in the long run, and that those things were going to bring me fulfillment and they were going to energize me. But also, I asked myself, what are the sacrifices that I was willing to make, right? If I am going to record a podcast episode every week, that means at least an hour or an hour and a half that I invest every week on my podcast. Is that a sacrifice that I want to make? Because if I say yes to this, I had to say no to other things that I could be doing in that hour and a half every week. And the answer for me was yes. I'm willing to do those things because those things fulfill me, those things energize me. I also asked myself, who do I want to become by doing this? Who am I trying to become? What is that version of myself that I want to become by doing this? And I was very clear. I want to be a podcast host. I want to be someone who is able to influence others and make an impact in others and help others in their personal career and leadership development journey. And answering those questions was really the first thing that I had to do before I was ready to start the podcast, because I knew then, maybe not as firmly as I know today, but I already knew then that it was going to be a journey and that I had to be ready to go through that journey if I wanted to get to the finish line. So when I think about the second type of people that I was talking about that celebrates every milestone, for me, it became a matter of not only celebrating every milestone, but also celebrating the effort that went into creating the podcast. So I mentioned that my goal, my vision when I started the podcast was I want to reach 1 million downloads. In part, it was because that's where people were talking about when I was following other podcasters that I admire. Everyone was talking about reaching the 1 million downloads, and I thought it was cool, to be completely honest. But then I translated that into what would that mean, right? That means that I get to touch maybe not 1 million people, because I hope that some of those individuals that are listening to the podcast are frequent listeners, right? So every time that someone downloads an episode, it counts. It doesn't mean it's a different person. But being able to impact a large amount of people, doesn't matter what the number was something that it was meaningful to me. So I set that as a goal because I wanted to have something to aspire towards, to look forward. But to be honest, that is so far away. That is so freaking far away. Sorry for my language. I mentioned I am celebrating the second anniversary of the podcast, and I have 20,000 downloads. The first year, I was close to 10,000. This second year, the number of downloads have picked up. So I'm starting to see that compound effect, if you will. But I'm so far away from my goal. So if I wait until I hit 1 million downloads to celebrate, I'll never get to celebrate because probably I'm going to be so discouraged that I'm not making progress or enough progress or fast enough progress towards my goal that I'm going to end up quitting. So I had to find a way to fall in love with the process, with the journey, and not only with the goal. And one of the things that I learned is that I needed to celebrate and reward myself for the effort and not just the results. So I share with you guys that I keep a gratitude journal where every day I write down the 5 things that I'm grateful for. And be sure that every Monday morning, the first thing that goes into my gratitude journal is I got to record a new episode of my podcast. And I have my own little celebration every time that I record a new podcast episode, regardless of how many people listen to the podcast, just the fact that I got to record a podcast episode. And I had to change my language, right? It wasn't about I have to record a podcast episode because I made the commitment to publish an episode every week or every other week as it started. But it was I got to record a new podcast episode. And after I finished recording every podcast episode, I have my own little celebration and I reward myself by doing something that is meaningful to me. Maybe is, I mean, they're small rewards. Don't think about like it's something huge, right? They're small rewards. I'm saving myself for the bigger celebration when I hit a milestone. Like anytime I hit, the first time I hit 1,000, well, it started with 100 downloads and 200 downloads. I started to celebrate every 100 downloads. And then it became a matter of celebrating every 1,000 downloads. So I do celebrate every milestone and I do celebrate the effort that goes into keeping up with the podcast. And I think that has been the one thing that has helped me the most in falling in love with the process and creating sustainable habits. And I applied this as well to my health and fitness journey, right? When I started 3 years ago, I started and stopped many times in my life, but the last time that I started was 3 years ago. And I started because I wanted to lose weight. That was my goal. And that was all that I was focused on. And in the past, it was the same thing. I started taking care of my nutrition or exercising because I wanted to look a certain way or I wanted to see a certain number on the scale. And that was my driver. And I would only celebrate when I would hit that goal. And I always gave up, always. And I think that now looking back, that was one of the main reasons why I kept giving up on my journey, because it is hard to keep yourself motivated. Like the difference between successful people from those that are not as successful, if you think about the most successful people in the world, is not because the goals that they set to themselves. Like I'm sure there are thousands of people that had the same goals as they did. It's the reason why they're successful is because they made it about the journey more than the end goal. And they know that if they stay consistent in their journey, the results will actually eventually come. But it's all about that consistency and staying in that journey and falling in love with the process, falling in love with what they're doing. And that has been the biggest change this time around since I started this health and fitness journey again. It's not anymore about losing weight. It's about my energy. It's around being able to focus. It's about being in the best health of my life. That has become now my goal. And that is not a goal. That is a journey. And just assimilating and accepting that is an ongoing journey has been a game changer. And this is the longest that I've been this consistent, like working out every day, like watching what I eat, being very mindful of the choices that I make. So, as I said, both my podcast and my health and fitness journey have taught me this lesson, something that I already knew that I had heard a lot of times, but like everything connected, right? Like everything connects in my mind now that I've been able to experience being on both perspectives and really learning to appreciate how much fulfilled I feel, how much happier I am when I'm focused on the journey and falling in love with the journey than when I'm just chasing a goal. And I'm still a goal-oriented person and I'm still setting goals for myself and I still have visions, but it's all about the journey. And when I say it's about the journey, it's about the lifestyle that I want to create. So ask yourself not only what you want to accomplish, but what lifestyle you want for yourself. That is a key question that you need to ask yourself so you can really focus on the process, right? Because the process, the journey is what is going to constitute and build that lifestyle that you're looking for. I think also another thing that is helpful to fall in love with the journey or the process is to find processes that you already enjoy. So I'm going to put the example, first of all, of my podcast. Like, I only talk about things that are important to me. I only talk about things that I am experiencing, things that I'm learning, things that I want to learn or I want to grow in. I don't deviate to other things that I don't enjoy. Because if I start pushing myself to talk about things that I personally don't enjoy talking about, I know that I am going to hate the process, right? I'm not going to love the process and then I'm going to give up. The same is with my health and fitness journey. Like when I pick what exercise I do, I pick exercises that I already enjoy. Like I love lifting weights more than I do doing cardio. Now I know I need both really to live my healthiest life, right? For my cardiovascular health, I also need cardio, but I play the ratios and I do more lift weighting than I do cardio. And even within cardio, I pick the things within cardio that I enjoy the most and I stay away from the things that I don't enjoy, because if I start pushing myself to do things that I don't enjoy, I am going to end up giving up, quitting, because it's a chore. It's something that I have to do versus something that I get to do. So always find things that you already enjoy, find processes that you already enjoy and leverage those. Don't look around and see what others are doing to decide what you're going to do, because we're all different. And at the end of the day, if you want to make it about the journey and really build this lifestyle, not only achieve the goal, but build the lifestyle, you need to focus on the things that you already enjoy. And that doesn't mean that there's going to be things in the journey that we're not going to like as much. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard and it's not going to be challenging. And there's always going to be bumps on the road and setbacks, things that you don't enjoy. But the majority of the time, you should spend it in things that you enjoy. So the journey becomes enjoyable and the journey starts to bring you joy and fulfillment. And then the other thing that I think is really helpful when we talk about falling in love with a process is realizing that when you want to stay consistent in a journey, you can't rely on motivation. You know, there is this myth that in order to stay consistent and doing something, you always need to be motivated to do those things. There are days, I typically record the podcast on Sundays, and there are days that I don't feel motivated to record. Like I have zero motivation to record, but I still show up and I still record that podcast episode. Because if you start to rely only on motivation as your gas, you're quickly are going to run out of gas. Like motivation is not always going to be there. It's not always going to show up for you, but you need to keep showing up for yourself. And that builds habits. And then when you build habits and you rely on the process, on the systems that you have built in your journey, it's going to be easier to stay consistent and continue to show up, whether your motivation decides to show up with you or not. So those are a few things that have really helped me fall in love with the journey and prioritize the journey over just achieving the goal, without saying that setting goals and having a vision plays an important role. Don't I don't want to downplay our goals, but it's always about the journey, and it's about the person that you're trying to become through that journey, that it's really going to bring you the true fulfillment and the true empowerment and the true sense of success and happiness. Because how many times have you in the past crossed that finish line, achieved that goal, only to realize that nothing has changed? You don't feel any different. Life is not any different. It happens a lot of times. I gave the example of health and fitness. Let's say I want to lose 10 pounds, and then you lose the 10 pounds, and yeah, it's great. I hit my goal, but you don't feel any different than you did yesterday when you were 9.8 pounds less, right? So goals are important, but it's not what is going to bring you the fulfillment. Think about goals that you had in the past. Maybe it was a financial goal. I want to make so much money. I want to have so much money saved on my bank account. And you hit that goal. And all of a sudden you thought, okay, my life is going to be completely different once I'm able to make six figures, or once I'm able to lose X amount of weight, or when I get to a certain position, or I reach a certain level in the hierarchy in my company. And then you get there, and it's like, yeah, you celebrate and you're happy for what, 24, 48 hours, a week, a month. And then life continues and you don't feel any different. You don't feel how you thought you would feel. You're not feeling fulfilled or happy in the long run, because when you achieve the goal, that is one point in time, right? That is 1 minute in time, 1 day in time, 1 month in time. But it might have taken you days, weeks, months, or years to get there. And when you look back, I'm sure that what brought you the most learnings, the most growth, was not crossing that finish line, but it was the journey that you went through to get to that finish line. So, my message to you today is, yes, set goals, yes, have a vision, but focus on the journey and fall in love with the journey. And I hope that the few tips that I share of the things that have helped me and continue to help me fall in love with the journey and the process can help you fall in love with your journey, with your process. Okay, I hope this was helpful. If you like today's podcast episode, as always, please head to Apple Podcasts or iTunes. Leave me a review. And while you're there, make sure that you subscribe so you get notifications for upcoming podcast episodes. And before I leave, I want to remind you that September 9th and 10th, I'm hosting a virtual personal growth and leadership conference. The lineup of speakers is amazing. Like, I cannot be more blessed with the lineup of speakers that are going to be participating in the Thrive conference. And that is another example where I am fully embracing the journey of putting together this conference, and I've learned already so much. But I can't wait for September 9th and 10th to celebrate my birthday with you, with all the speakers pouring into our cups and learning and growing. There's no better way that I can think about celebrating my birthday. So I hope that you join us for the Thrive Conference. Tickets are completely free. You can grab yours right now using the link on the description of this podcast episode. And with that, I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you here again next week for a new episode of the Leading Yourself podcast.